Brian and Christine, thank you so much for accepting the invitation to share a very vulnerable and personal experience from your life in this past year, a quite unique year that is marked by this forever label, COVID-19. Both of you are healthcare professional. Christine, you're a nurse practitioner. Brian, you are a physician. And both of you in your line of work have touched many people's lives in this process of treatment and healing. Yet last year, you have experienced quite a journey when it came to this viral experiment, if we could call it like that, called COVID-19, and you were among the first ones to encounter this contamination with COVID. What happened? How was it for you?
Well, as you know, last year, 2020 was a very different year, probably one for the century that we'll never forget. I just remember the beginning of the year, January, February, we were hearing about this COVID virus. It was just a huge unknown. We didn't know what to expect. We didn't know what was coming for us here. And the more and more we heard, we just, everyone's scared. Everyone's scared, including us. We, from the health professional standpoint, we didn't know what we were dealing with specifically. We were hearing all these different things that were happening. So there was a lot of unknown. But when you're listening to it on the news or from your colleagues or from the government, it doesn't hit you personally until it comes to you. And I just remember it was about mid-March 2020 when I came home and I started feeling chills. I remember that, chills, not feeling well, feeling ill, had a little fatigue going on. And I remember mentioning it to Christine.
Yeah, I remember you walked in the garage and you're like, I'm feeling tired. And I said, yeah, I know, you get tired from work. But then when you said, I have body aches, I think at that moment I said, oh, you got to go to isolation like now in a separate room. And you were like, no, I'm fine. I'm like, no, just go because we don't want to chance anything. Again, we didn't know, but you were in isolation that night.
Right. So,
yeah.
I mean, you hear about this thing, but then when I actually started feeling it, I thought, uh-oh, this could be it. And sure enough, we played it safe at home because, what we know, I was locked into one of our bedrooms and pretty much stayed there for the whole duration. Called my colleagues up. They ordered the test for me, so I went the next day, I believe, to get tested, and found out the following day from my colleague friend who called me personally and said, your test came back positive. And I just remember that moment when I heard that, even hearing it in his voice too. It was a big shock because you wouldn't really think this wouldn't really happen to me. I'll take care of everyone who has it, but I wouldn't really think of it happening to me. And I just remember there was this wave of emotions that hit me at that moment, and just wondering, what am I supposed to do? What's going to happen to us as a family? Because there's all these possibilities that rush through your mind. And then I remember, she came to the door, and because we're isolated, we're talking through the door and didn't open the door. And I told her, my test came back. And she said, oh, what did it come back? And I said, it came back positive.
And I thought he was kidding because he always jokes around like that at home. And I'm like, no, for real, don't joke with me. And he's like, no, it came back positive. And I remember I think we both got really quiet.
Yes.
And I was hugging the door, and I could feel you hugging the door too, because at that point, like we couldn't, and I think we were just quiet for about 3 minutes, and I said, okay, we know what we need to do. We need to secure the door. At this point, we knew it could be airborne, so we were just much more, cautious. And, Yeah, we just pretty much did what basic things like hand washing and quarantine, separate dishes. Of course, at that point, I think my stress level went really high because then the thought was now, okay, well, we were in the same bedroom the night before, and am I going to get COVID? And who's going to take care of our children when you have two parents who are COVID? And nobody wants to take care of our kids who could be spreading COVID. So it was like, if we're both isolated, so all these emotions, I think, as a mother came up, who's going to take care of the family? What about work? And I think work said, well, if you're not sick, you can still come to work. And that was a bit of a dilemma where I had to make a decision. You know, my family has to come first right now before work. So I voluntarily called off work because I had friends that said, don't leave him at home alone, because we've heard stories at this point where people were great and in 24 hours just went downhill. And these are things that weren't in the news, but because we're in the healthcare field, we heard of sudden death and things like that already. So there was more fear, I think, from our part, knowing what we did know that the other public people don't know unless it's on the news.
Correct.
So.
And even though the outcome obviously was different, that kind of mirrored his progress. The first few days was pretty stable, and it looked like you were improving, but then things took a turn for the worse.
Yes, that is correct. So I think the first 3 days, I basically had the chills, the body aches, the fatigue. Then I improved, and we decided we had to continue with the isolation period. So I was getting a little bored in the room. I think the only time I could come out was to eat, and I was all the way on the other end of the table. Everyone was away from me. But basically, I was stuck in that room. And, I just wanted to do a little more activities and whatnot. But then around day 7, that's when the fevers came back. I was coughing a little bit more, and, I felt a little bit more out of breath, just from doing little activities. And the fatigue came back. And we knew that with this disease, around day 7 to day 10, if you start getting worse, that's when things can get really bad.
I think he was hiding a lot of it, though, because those first 7 days, he was like, oh, I'm fine, I'm doing okay. I would be checking his temperature on a daily basis, and I think one time we were Zooming a family member. I was in one room Zooming with a family member, and he was Zooming, and I could hear you coughing more. And I remember getting upset, you going, wait a minute, you're telling me you're fine. You're not fine. You're coughing much more, right? And I think I heard you one time, like, kind of short of breath when you went up the stairs, like one time. And so I thought, oh, wait a minute, I don't think that you're getting better. But I think the 7th day, the fevers came back. And that was, I think, what really got us really nervous, because you're supposed to be getting better, right? Not getting worse. So
You were so nervous that at one point you had to have what you called the talk.
yeah, we had a talk. So
Well, I think one of the reasons why we felt compelled to do this talk is we knew what you hear from others is if you end up in the hospital, chances are you're going to be intubated, and to communicate after that point is going to be extremely difficult, if impossible.
we also knew being on a ventilator, you had an 80% mortality rate, so that wasn't a good thing. I think what made me nervous is that at that time, people were thinking it's just for the older people that were going to get really sick, but I had a friend who told me that her husband, who was the first COVID case in LA County, was in his late mid-40s, which is around our age, and he got intubated. And you're thinking, how can a healthy person at that age be intubated? And so again, nobody knew, but because we've heard of people just, terrible things just happened right away, we thought, oh, wait a minute, we need to be more practical.
So we had the talk about what would happen if I did not survive. We talked about, what our wishes were for each other and for the kids, and then I think we had to really reach out to God at that moment because we felt, well, I felt alone for a little while, and of course scared. But having faith in God did carry us through. It was the only thing that would really keep us going at that moment. Because I mean, sometimes people would in that situation would just feel like breaking down. But we had our faith.
Yeah. So I think it was just in my closet, just really just in tears and just crying. I remember being on my knees and just praying. And all these thoughts just come to your mind where, okay, well, Lord, if this is your will, like, of course I don't want him to die, but if this is your will, you're going to have to get us through this, give us the strength.
You came to a point where you've experienced that limitation. All of my knowledge, all of my skill have been employed. I've done everything I could. Now I'm resigning, I'm surrendering in front of God. Just God and I in a closet. What a powerful picture to have that kind of encounter and that kind of surrender. That must have changed, impacted your life, changed it to a way that has never been the same again since then.
It sure did, because, you have some sense of control in your life, at least you think you do. But I think what I learned from that experience is that God's in control.
You are alive and well now, and we're so happy that you are alive. How has your life been transformed, not just because of this viral experience, but also because of how you've lived it with Christine, with the Lord, with your entire family, Brian?
That's a good question. So it took about 3 weeks total for it to completely clear my system, but honestly, it actually took about 3 months before I could get my energy back to 100%. So it is a pretty nasty virus. And fortunately for me, it didn't end up in the hospital, praise the Lord. I think what this experience has taught us is a couple of things. One, compassion and empathy. We talk to a lot of people who are going through the same experience. Unfortunately, their outcome is not the same as ours. And the fact that I kind of have an idea of what it is like allows me to connect with those people more. I think it taught us too the value of our time here on earth, the limited time that we have, and to make sure we live every moment to its fullest. And one thing it also did show us is the love that we have from our friends and our family. Because when we were in that situation, even though I was physically isolated in that room, the outpouring from our friends and from our family was very encouraging and so powerful. And I knew that even if my time was up, I knew that Christine and the kids will be taken care of because of the love and the support that we have from those people.
I think for me, the one thing that really solidified more than ever, and I think this comes from my experience with losing my father, when I was 19. That was a very difficult tragedy in my life. And yet, God has taken care of my family when we lost our father, and seeing his love to care for us. And I think that's where that may have been the strength in going through this, knowing that should something happen to Brian, that God was going to take care of us.
Christine and Brian, you've experienced firsthand agony in this journey with COVID, the loneliness of isolation, and now you're enjoying life, which is so beautiful, such a great gift. I trust that this journey that you've had with the Lord will stay in your family with your boys, who were firsthand witnesses to this miracle of healing and life from the Lord. And I know that many people who have listened to this testimony will be so uplifted and encouraged and transformed in their own journey with the Lord. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your journey with us.
Thank you, Pastor.
Thank you for having us here.